All right, let's begin. Turn my webcam as well. Great. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar, as mentioned, on migrating data to 3D experience. If anyone has any questions or have any issues with the audio or video, please raise your hand or let me know so I can correct that. As we go through, we'll be going over various topics, and feel free to chime in and ask questions as I go. If appropriate, they will be answered, or we'll wait till the end and answer any remaining questions. So with that, let's start. For those of you that are not familiar with XLM Solutions, we consider ourselves a complete PLM solution provider. We've been in business since 2005, so we're going on an 18-year-old company providing services and solutions around various PLM products. We really pride ourselves, for expertise in the industry, for being, both from our business savvy and technical expertise. We're always staying up to date on the latest best practices and industry trends, both from a business and process point of view, and a technical, programming, database, IT point of view as well. We are both a Dassault business partner, and then obviously Dassault's subsidiary SolidWorks, and recognized as a SolidWorks certified professional service company. We're always, as mentioned, dedicating ourselves to quality and excellence through continuous research, building various customer relationships and partnership relationships, and being on the forefront of the new technology trends and initiatives that are out there. And as today we'll be talking about data migration, we really do all aspects of PLM implementations around 3D experience and other PLM products, everything from discovery workshops to solution architecture, general implementation and configuration, whether that's CAD, integrations, bill of material management, change management, etc. Customizations, integrations to other systems like ERP, and data migrations, which we'll talk about today, and then finally training and support. So with loading data, we always say that, regarding data loading strategies, loading or migrating data into a PLM PDM system, specifically 3D experience, can be a daunting task. But with diligent planning and thorough testing, the process can go smoothly. And today we'll talk about some strategies to ease that migration pain or make that migration go easier. Go here. So the migration, or this presentation, is really going to be broken down into maybe 3 sections. We'll talk about data migration analysis, and that's kind of going to be agnostic to any migration from any system to any PLM system. And we'll talk about the states of the data, cleaning up the data, data loading rules, etc. Then we'll talk about various data loading options, and that will be fairly specific to 3D experience. And then we'll talk about executing a data migration and going into testing, data verification, planning for the data load, and then finally the production data. So with loading data or doing a data migration project, it's always critical to analyze the data to be loaded, to understand what you're working with. So I tend to break the the analysis into a couple of different buckets. The first I talk about is the data, the legacy data. Where is it coming from? What is it? Are we loading files and folders from a file system? Are we, involving a database like another PLM or a legacy PLM system that we need to load data from that might have obviously records in the database and links to files and some type of storage vault or store? Are we dealing with hard copies? This, today in 2023, we don't really come across it very often, but through our years, we've come across customers that actually had filing cabinets of drawings, and part of the data migration was to actually scan those and then load them into a PLM system. And then, what type of data are we loading? Is it CAD data that has links with, internal CAD files, obviously, model to drawing or assembly to part or subassembly? Is there metadata related to the files? Is it just metadata? It could be just a bill of materials that doesn't have any, associated files or CAD to it. Is it office documents that may not have any links, image files, etc.? So get a good understanding of what that source data is. And once you have that, you really need to anticipate, how you're going to deal with that data or what issues you may come across. So, is it all available? Is it, somehow on a third-party system that you don't have access to? Maybe part of the migration dealt with a company that's, diverging from another company, and the company, the source company has the data, and the diverged company that needs to load it needs to get access to it. So can you get access to it? That's maybe more of a political or a technical thing to make sure you have access to it, but do you have access to that source data? If it's in a third party, a legacy system, you who's going to be doing the migration, want to make sure that you understand that third party system and how it works, so you can get the data out of it. And in that case, sometimes it makes sense to bring in other experts that has that, that intimate knowledge on that third party system to make sure that data can be extracted properly. Is there any missing data? The data we're loading there, part numbers missing or descriptions missing that you may need to deal with. Missing links, especially when we're dealing with CAD files, are all the links and references good, or will we bring up an assembly that's looking for various parts that cannot be found for one reason or the other? So we don't necessarily need to fix all the data at this point, but understand what we're dealing with to factor out what will be that scope and what will be involved in the data migration. And then I always say additional experts. Like I said, don't be afraid to bring in additional people if needed, if there's a system or a scenario that you don't have the expertise around. Mapping rules is also very critical. So how are you going to map properties from the legacy system to the source system? So, dealing with 3DEXPERIENCE, if we have a part number field, should that go to the title in 3DEXPERIENCE, or should that go to the enterprise identification number? State mappings, in 3DEXPERIENCE regarding maturity states, we have in work, frozen, release, and obsolete. Do you have similar states in the legacy system, and how would they map over into 3DEXPERIENCE? Revision conformity. So with in 3DEXPERIENCE, there's set revision patterns that can be used, and if your revision doesn't match that pattern, it's not going to get loaded into 3DEXPERIENCE. So making sure your revisions from the legacy system will match the revisions that you've set up in 3DEXPERIENCE. Type or collab space mappings. Obviously in 3DEXPERIENCE, you have physical products, you have documents, you have drawings, you have issues, you have various types within the system, and depending on how you configure 3DEXPERIENCE, you can subtype it. So how will data from the legacy system get mapped to the various types, in 3DEXPERIENCE, and then where do they go? What collab space or organization will they get mapped to? Not only a collab space, but should they get mapped to bookmarks that exist in the system? Or should part of the migration create the bookmarks? Do you want to set up classification mappings if you have data classified with specific attributes, how will those get mapped over? And then, what types of links and relationships do we need to create? Do we need to create a specification link from a physical product to a document that gets migrated over? So all those mapping rules really need to be defined, and then understand if there's any other special logic needs to be put in place. And a lot of times I consider that of transforming data. So maybe in the legacy system, your revisions are 1, 2, 3 numeric, but when you migrate them over to 3DEXPERIENCE, you want to migrate them over as ABC alpha. Or maybe in your legacy system, you have revisions that are not used in military spec applications like O and I and X, and have a rule in place. If you come across one of those revisions, have logic to change it to a revision that is supported. And then finally, you probably don't know this until you get closer into the migration process, but how much data are we dealing with? Will we be able to migrate that data over a weekend? Can we do it over a week? Does the systems need to be down when we do the migration? Do we perceive that we may have to do some delta migrations, etc.? We may not have all the answers at this time, but we should really understand the volume of data we're working with. What will be that window to do that final cutover? So with any migration, there's always data cleanup, and as good as you think your data is, usually there's issues with it in one sort or the other. And a lot of times the data migration tools will not even load the data if there are issues with the data. So it's very important to have good data you're working with. You say garbage out, garbage in, but sometimes garbage out won't even allow garbage in, just won't load. So there's a lot of different data cleanup scenarios to check, and I've listed some of the key ones that we run across. So a lot of times you might have duplicate part numbers. So you have two objects, let's say in the database, both pointing to the same or different file. So you have part number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that points to washer 1, and you have part number 7, 8, 9 that also points to washer 1. So did someone create two different parts for the same developed, designed model, or are those truly different part numbers for different reasons? Sometimes you have duplicate file names, and you have 3 washer 1s again in the system. Are they all the same washer, or do they actually represent different part numbers? Missing or incorrect file attributes. So usually the key attributes I always say are part number, revision, and description. And then could be a lot of other metadata around it, but if certain mandatory attributes are missing, how do you want to handle it? As mentioned, specifically around CAD, missing or incorrect file associations or links. This is where you have links where you have an assembly missing the parts. Dealing with SolidWorks, you have a drawing that may be linked to the correct model, but missing the correct configuration in that model. Circular links between assemblies, especially when dealing with in-context designs. So you can have a lot of linking situations that may need to clean up. Multiple or no links to organizational structures. So all the data, when we load into 3DEXPERIENCE, needs to be associated to a collaborative space and an organization, and making sure that the information to determine where the data should go exists and is obtainable, so you can map it to the right collab space and organization through the experience. And then, as mentioned, non-compliant revisions or versioning. If your legacy data has revisions like IO, X, etc., and those revisions are not supported in 3DEXPERIENCE, you need to have a plan in place to resolve them. A lot of that might be cleaning up the data that's going to be migrated, having some type of transformation routines that fix it. or changing your rules of how data is managed in 3DEXPERIENCE. So half the battle is identifying what you have, and then sometimes it's easy to fix it, but first you need to identify the issues that you need to deal with. And we do have utilities out there to help analyze the data and provide reports of the various missing attributes, missing links, etc., to help you on your migration journey. Another thing is to really understand when you're doing migrations, and a lot of times when dealing with management, people say, yeah, I just want to migrate data from my source system, i.e. Smart Team, to 3DEXPERIENCE. Just take the data from the one system and put in the other system. But it's not as easy as that. And if you haven't heard me say it, I'll say it now. The devil's always in the details. So you really need to understand that the source system and the target systems behave differently. How you access files are different. How you search for data, whether you're browsing for it or performing specific searches, they act differently. Permissions are very different. I would say 3DEXPERIENCE has a very unique way to handle permissions through their P&O module, which could be a whole separate webinar. But most likely how permissions are set up in 3DEXPERIENCE is going to be different how they're working in your legacy system. So when you're loading data, you really need to understand how all these things work, so you don't load data in one way, but then turns out users can't use it. Based on license implications, for example, depending on what objects you load your data into in 3DEXPERIENCE, users will need certain licenses. So if you're going to load everything as a physical product and need to edit it, you may need one license, versus if you're going to load the data as documents, then you may need a different license. So license implications, apply as well. How metadata is being used, accessed, edited may be a factor. Permissions around workflow states, or how changes work from one state to the other, may be a factor as well. Not alone, changes or workflow changes that may have unique ways to get migrated into 3DEXPERIENCE. The key is, we talk about all this mapping, how we need a map from the legacy system to the source system, but before you do it, really an exercise needs to happen to understand 3DEXPERIENCE, really understand how it works, and then perform the mappings. And again, that's an exercise we could help companies with if need be. To get into more migration considerations specifically around 3DEXPERIENCE, as mentioned, you really need to understand the different concepts and behaviors in 3DEXPERIENCE around different types, relationships, attributes, the metadata, the policy and lifecycle states. You really need to understand uniqueness in 3DEXPERIENCE. So there's a very common term you might hear called TNR, type, name, and revision. So TNR, or type, name, revision, uniquely identifies the object. You can never have something with the same type, name, and revision. So if you have data for some reason that's going to come across with duplicate TNRs, that information needs to be addressed. And perhaps you put a default number generator on the name, so each object gets a incremental number. There's also in 3DEXPERIENCE certain characters that are not supported. When dealing with files, most of these characters aren't allowed in the file name anyway, so it's a non-issue. But sometimes when you're dealing with SOLIDWORKS configurations, which these characters are allowed in, they may not necessarily be supported in 3DEXPERIENCE. So I believe today in the latest SOLIDWORKS integration using UPS, many or most of these characters are supported, but there are cases where you may have, whether you're loading into an older version of 3DEXPERIENCE or whatnot, characters in the configuration name, for example, or in CATIA in the instance name that are not supported that you still need to clean up. So, some things to consider, through the migration project. And then I'd say, migration projects are always opportunities to change how companies work. We don't really want to, I always say, reinvent the wheel and have 3DEXPERIENCE work just like your legacy system. 3DEXPERIENCE has some inherent best practices and methodologies how to work, but doing migration projects is a great time to review your current processes, understand what's working, what's not working, how you may want to, transform and manipulate the data into 3DEXPERIENCE and impose those new processes, new ways of working with the data, viewing the data, accessing the data in 3DEXPERIENCE. So maybe you have a PLM system that has data, but when you do the migration, not only do you want to load data from the PLM system, but maybe you want to cross-reference it and load additional data from other systems, whether that may be ERP or CRM as well. So, this might be redundant or common sense, but with any migration project, it's a great opportunity to really review business processes and work to enhance them versus just doing it how we always did it. So it's a good excuse to not only move data to a new system, but improve around how companies work with the data as well. And then with any migrations, I say there's always trade-offs. So keep that in mind. There's trade-offs by how much you want to automate the migration versus doing manual migrations, the timing it takes to load the data. Do we need to load everything within 24 hours, or can we load it within 40 hours? The price, most likely the more you want to automate the migration, the faster you want to do it, may require multiple machines, multiple processing, serial or parallel processing. So that may increase the price. And then, how many resources involved? I'd say throwing resources at projects don't always make them go faster, but having the right resources involved, both from maybe a consultant or a migration resource, and then the customer itself, because there's people involved, developing the migration, running the migration, but then there's people that need to test the results, provide feedback, make sure that the migrated data works within the confines, the defined processes, etc. So with any project, there's trade-offs. If you want everything, probably you're going to have a very high price. But if you can, take some, make some good choices, there's a good balance that comes into place of how to best load the data to meet budgets, meet timelines, and disperse the work amongst the various players. And again, we can help you, do that analysis and help balance out those efforts in doing the migration. And I'm going to get a little bit more technical now and talk a little bit more about 3DEXPERIENCE migrations, but when doing migrations, we really see two main types of data migrations. One where it's coming out of a Windows file-based file system structure, on a local machine or a network. In those cases, a lot of times we not only need to read the files, but we need to, actually open the files in some type of tool to get properties out of the files, to validate links, etc. Also, when dealing with file structures, if we need to load full history, it's doable, but usually more complicated because you can't have the same file with the same name in the same directory. So either files get renamed with revisions appended to them, or you have subdirectories based on different revisions, and the data and the linking of the data can get a lot more complicated. But definitely there's a lot of file-based data migrations going on. And then, though in our case, a lot of times we're dealing more with what we'd consider legacy or database migrations. Usually they're coming from a legacy system, such as Inovia Smart Team, Microsoft SharePoint, SolidWorks PDM, Autodesk Vault, to name the few. And in that case, a lot of times it's faster to extract the data because we don't have to read the files. We're just reading the data in the database, and running queries against databases are a lot faster than actually opening files. Though it does require understanding of the source system and the source system data model to make sure you are extracting the right data with the right links from the right tables, from that legacy system. So, there is definitely still work involved. So when doing data migrations in general, we usually break the migration up into two parts. Usually there's an extraction from the legacy system or file system to some type of neutral format, and then a import from that neutral format into 3DEXPERIENCE. And depending on what 3DEXPERIENCE tools we use, that neutral format may change. So when you're doing that extraction piece, whoever's doing the extraction piece really needs familiarity with the legacy system to make sure they're extracting the right data and able to extract the data. In most databases, most legacy systems, that data model or the database where the data exists can be reverse engineered. So as yes, you should have familiarity with it, even if you don't, a lot of times it's human readable and you can figure it out yourself. And sometimes you need the ability to read file data directly. For example, dealing with SolidWorks data, sometimes you need to open the file to read the properties and interrogate the links between the CAD data. And as mentioned, we've done a lot of migrations or data extractions from Smart Team and Inovia Matrix 1, which was the precursor to 3DEXPERIENCE, DBWorks, Autodesk Vault, SolidWorks PDM, Meridian, and SharePoint, to name a few. As mentioned, when extracting data, you want to extract it to a neutral file format. XML is a format we use a lot, but that XML format may change based on the tools we'll use to import the data. Sometimes we can directly, sometimes we'll export to a format that the PLM or 3DEXPERIENCE can directly read. And that's where, again, that XML file, whether it's XML, JSON, or CSV may tweak based on how we're going to import the data in 3DEXPERIENCE. XPDM is a tool from Dassault within 3DEXPERIENCE to loading the data, and it has its own specific XML format to use. And then we talk about, on the extraction piece, it may make sense to transform the data, such as alpha revisions to numeric, or there's been cases where in the legacy system they had individual objects for each sheet of a multi-sheet drawing, and we were able to merge the sheets together into a multi-sheet TIFF file and just load the multi-sheet TIFF file versus creating an object for each individual sheet. So that's another example of a data transformation. So when loading data to 3DEXPERIENCE, there's different tools out there that can be used to load the data. And depending on what data you need to load and where you need to load it, there's pros and cons for each tool out there. So first we talk about manually loading data, which is, for small data sets, a lot of times it's easier just to manually do it, hire an intern to do it, than automate a tool to do it. With manual, again, it's straightforward, but with anything done manual, it's prone to human mistakes. It could be time consuming, and it's a lot harder to load full history if that's required. When we get into tools, there is sometimes a distinction, I should mention it now, I probably should have mentioned it earlier, between on cloud, 3DEXPERIENCE on cloud, or the Dassault public cloud, and then on-premise or through a private cloud. So some of the automated tools only work, on-premise and on private cloud. They don't work with the sole public cloud. So when I'm talking about tools, keep in mind if you are on cloud that some of them may not apply. So moving on to automated, like you can write different scripts, JPOs, Java programs, MQL, which is a command line query language for 3DEXPERIENCE, or TCL, which is a way to automate the MQL commands to load data. This is only would apply to on-premise. But if you're on cloud, you can make use of different 3DEXPERIENCE APIs and web services to create the data. And you can really write a fully automated, your own fully automated program to load data. Again, there's a lot of details behind this. If you're using 3DEXPERIENCE on cloud and you want to load CAD data, not all the web services support CAD data. But if you just had to load bill of material data or documents, then you could have web services to do it. For on-premise, there's a technology called Adaptlets, where you can map a database model outside of 3DEXPERIENCE to the data model in 3DEXPERIENCE, and it pretty much sucks the data in through this Adaptlet technology. And it's something that requires a lot of understanding of the behind the scenes data model, but if you understand it, it's something that can load data very fast. Though the person who's doing it must know the 3DEXPERIENCE data model, and it's not, it is a tool that comes with 3DEXPERIENCE, but it's not officially supported. And then for on-premise data migrations, there's this XPDM technology, and it works with EDAT. I'll explain it a little bit more. That is used to load CAD data and structured data into 3DEXPERIENCE. XPDM stands for transfer of PDM data. So there's a whole framework used to load the data. There's tools to load data automatically from SolidWorks PDM or Smart Team into 3DEXPERIENCE. You can expand the framework for specific custom migrations or data transformations, though it does require this MUX license to use it. And as I mentioned, this is also on-premise only as well. If you wanted to write your own custom tools to load data, whether it's using web services or JPOs, you can do it. And a lot of times you say it's good for large migrations because you can program in your own rules, your own behaviors, how data is going to work. So if you say I want to load this document and then automatically load it, link it to this bookmark, you can program in those rules to handle it. You can write your own logging and error handling. You can, any complex data loading scenario it can support because you're kind of writing the logic yourself. You can interrogate the data when loading it. So, if the file from legacy state is in work, load it to this collab space, and if it's released, load it to this other collab space. So there's a lot of logic you could build into it, but it's probably could be the most expensive or complicated because you're really writing your own unique migration tool. Next is, and I just added a slide because it's just released, but there is for on-cloud customers, there's a new tool, and it's not just a license, it's a whole solution called XTA or 3DXTA, which allows you to load data from both Smart Team and SolidWorks PDM to the cloud. And it has tools to help extract the data out of the source legacy systems, transition it or transform it, and then import it into 3DEXPERIENCE. So this tool just came out July 8th. So what's that, 12 days ago with the release of FDO3 for 23X. And it's a cloud-only tool for migrating data to 3DEXPERIENCE. I believe it's LA right now, limited release or limited availability. But we see a lot of promise in using this tool for migrations. though I assume there's still probably a lot of issues and fixes that will need to go into it before it becomes, fairly stable. So if that's something you're looking to do an on-cloud migration, there's tools out there. You can contact us or your other partner, but don't expect it to be a magic button yet. I'm sure there's still a lot of work that goes into it. And here's a couple more screenshots around the tools. Some other things to keep in mind. It does require clean data. So if you do have those broken references or various scenarios I said at the beginning where you need to clean up your data, it's not going to load it. So definitely expect to have prestige data or require some cleanup. There's some options to, if the out-of-the-box migration tools don't load everything as you need it to be loaded, there are some configurable options outside the tool to do some pre and post data manipulation. So for example, if you want to classify all your data, the tool doesn't set classifications on data, but we could post-process the data after it's loaded to properly classify it if necessary. It does require licenses, so this is one component of a license within the package. I believe you buy the package, but it includes licenses that will provide test environments, and the tool is based on the integration framework technology. If you're familiar with that, the integration framework technology allows you to integrate to ERP systems. So it provides some of those licenses as well. As mentioned, it does provide some test environments, so you're not loading your data into your production environment. But a question I have, and I have to find this out, is if you create a configuration in your production environment, i.e. add a new property or a new field, do you need to manually create that same configuration in the test environment, or is there a way to copy over those data model configurations or admin configurations? And then as the tool is really geared to SolidWorks and SmartTeam, we believe we can expand it to migrate from other legacy systems outside of SmartTeam and SolidWorks PDM. So if you're on cloud and you have Autodesk Vault and you want to migrate your Autodesk Vault to 3DEXPERIENCE on cloud, I don't want to say for sure, but we're feeling confident we can use this tool to do that as well. XPDM. So XPDM is a technology used to import data to 3DEXPERIENCE for on-premise environments. So this tool is only for on-cloud. XPDM is only for on-premise. But it's a way to extract the data into a specific XML format. And then once in, you can use the XPDM XML file to map the data, based on structured data, map it to physical products, 3D shapes, documents, links. There's ways to automate the migration. It does make use of the EXH and MUX licenses. And one thing that's pretty cool about the tool, it allows you to convert CATIA v5 data to CATIA 3DEXPERIENCE or CATIA v6 data automatically. XPDM is part of the 3DEXPERIENCE native apps or the CATIA native apps. So if you're familiar with the native apps, you have them installed, you have access to the XPDM loader. You can add additional logic through the data migrations in XPDM. So there are files called cat rule files, and you can manipulate those cat rule files to add your own logic. So I say, if the created by user and SmartTeam is Marc, we can say write logic that says, if it's equal to Marc, set the owner field to be Ilan in 3DEXPERIENCE. You can also do mapping. So if you create additional variables, you can map your unique custom variables to the 3DEXPERIENCE fields through this PDM custom config file. It provides logging, though I'd say the tool is sensitive to failure. So again, if you have missing references, if you have spaces at the end of file names, there's all different scenarios that could cause the import to fail that you would then have to go and clean up. Again, for on-premise, I don't know how many have heard of EDAT before. EDAT stands for Innovia Development Acceleration Toolkit. And basically what EDAT does, makes use of the XPDM technology to load data from various Dassault legacy systems, whether it's Designer Central within 3DEXPERIENCE to Power by SolidWorks PDM, Smart Team, or FileBase. It allows you to load data from those systems into 3DEXPERIENCE. It makes use of the XPDM functionality. So again, this is only on-premise, but it has different steps where it analyzes the legacy data, it exports the legacy data, and then you import it. It makes use of ActiveMQ for queuing up, jobs, migration jobs, and then a SQL Express database for logging information. And it does require a license, and it's mainly used to load SolidWorks, CATIA, or their CAD data into 3DEXPERIENCE. Again, this is on-premise only, and in my simple opinion, this EDAT tools, which have been out for a while, the equivalent will be the XTA tools for on cloud. Also, there's ways, if you just want to load bill of material data from Excel, you can do that through some of the apps in 3DEXPERIENCE. So through the engineering release or the Zen tool, you have an import from Excel command, and if you build a Excel structure with various fields and information and structure levels, you can automatically, the tool can read the Excel file and import that data into 3DEXPERIENCE. There are limits to this. Well, first of all, the data being loaded is based on out-of-the-box functionality, so it's an out-of-the-box tool that any user could use, but it only loads 300 rows from Excel. So if your bill of materials over 300 rows, you got to either load multiple Excels to handle it, or it's not going to load all the data. And it doesn't support, other related data to the physical product. So it doesn't load files or linked files. It doesn't load materials or alternatives, which are other data that may be associated to the the engineering item or the physical product. But it isn't a way to load bill of material data directly into 3DEXPERIENCE. I don't have a slide here, but the same thing goes for documents. Through bookmarks, you can point to a file structure, a folder in Windows, and it will duplicate that folder structure and load all the files as well. Again, it's not loading metadata or creating links or whatnot, but through the bookmarks, there's a way to load file data, flat file data into 3DEXPERIENCE as well. I should add a slide for my next version of this presentation. So when you're migrating data, as mentioned, you really need to handle the different data models between legacy systems and your new 3DEXPERIENCE system. When we migrate data, we always want to make sure the data will be able to grow in 3DEXPERIENCE. So we never want to migrate data and then a new app comes out or a new role and people say, oh, you can't use it because of how that data was migrated. We always make sure that data gets migrated the same way it would get created out of the box. When dealing with large data migrations, usually companies say, hey, we're going to shut down our legacy system on Friday and be up and running on Monday within 3DEXPERIENCE. So our goal is always to load or do a migration within a reasonable time frame, i.e. usually a weekend or a long weekend for extremely large migrations. We always try to do what we call a big bang or a single migration, where, as I said, you shut down the system, on Friday night, and you're able to turn on the system, come Monday morning. But sometimes, based on the amount of data you have, that's not always possible. Now, we always try to figure out ways to do that, whether by parallel processing, having multiple datas load the data, multiple computers running data loads in parallel, etc. But again, sometimes that's not always possible. So in that case, there's ways to do delta migrations. So you would load the majority of the data into 3DEXPERIENCE, over, it could be weeks while the users are still using the legacy system, and then figure out a cutover weekend and figure out the delta from what was migrated to 3DEXPERIENCE and what the users created new in the legacy system, and just migrate the data over a weekend for that smaller delta set. With delta migrations, though, they do require more development time, more configuration time, and more testing, because not only you're testing the main migration, you got to test this delta migration as well. And some things to consider regarding, this time improvements, having, better hardware makes a difference. SSD drives, increasing the memory, having different data located on different drives for better input, output, etc. So hardware can make a big difference in migration speeds as well. Also with 3DEXPERIENCE, and I don't have a slide here, but maybe I should add it, is you have your indexer. So you have your Excelite or your CloudView indexer that needs to index the data. So not only when we load data do we need to load it, but we make sure there's time in place so it gets indexed so the data is properly searchable when users use it as well. So that's another key point. Some best practices in general, a little bit is this is a repeat from what I said, but install out of the box 3DEXPERIENCE and make sure you understand how it works. Do your due diligence to review the legacy system and identify what you want to migrate, how you want to map the data. Definitely there'll be concerns. They should be put in the forefront of the migration project, so you know what issues, risks you're dealing with, and have plans to mitigate it. Make sure you have a test environment based on the data to be migrated to the legacy system. There's different technologies out there that I discussed, so pick the right one. And sometimes it's not, there's more than one solution that you might be using. Maybe using multiple technologies to load the data. Make sure to run 2 to 4 test cycles. You're never going to migrate the data once correctly the first time. There's always issues. Make sure to validate the data. And you will find issues and fix the issues and rerun. And it could be your migration tools. It could be how 3DEXPERIENCE is configured. It could be data cleanup. There's multiple areas where those fixes come into play. When you're doing a migration, plan for the production migration, set users' expectations, make sure users are trained. There's people to support the end users. There will be a learning curve. Expect users not knowing what to do and spending time to help them to work as efficiently as possible in a new environment. And then finally, the production migration. So as I said, testing the migration is extremely important. Have a good test plan. Your test plan should cover various testing scenarios. Test with large assemblies, test with assemblies using standard parts, put the migrate data through a change and make sure it works properly. Test, using legacy data with new data that you're designing, and make sure you run through all user scenarios. Like I said, there will be issues. You'll discover issues, and it could be in the legacy data. There could be bugs in the migration code. It could be with 3DEXPERIENCE itself. So you'll definitely be addressing issues and making changes to the tools and test again. The data migrations have a lot of details, a lot of areas where things could go wrong. So they're projects. They're various month-long projects, and be prepared for multiple test migrations before you get it right. With pre-planning, as I said, you need to identify when your legacy system will be turned off. This time you'll have a really good estimate of how long the data will take to load. So can we do it over a weekend, a long hour? Maybe we just do it one evening. So you have that done. Make sure you have a document procedure of what needs to be done. Any pre-data loading activities, sending out an email, shutting down the legacy system, exporting usernames, etc. There might be a lot of pre-data loading activities, and then there's usually various data loading activities. We run our export tool, we run our import tool, we run indexing, we do some post-processing to clean up data, we send out an email to the users to start validating data, etc. So you should have that documented so you follow those steps and make sure along with that documentation, the key personnel are identified for all the different steps within that data loading process. And then, the final data load or the production data load, we say, with proper planning and testing, that final data load should go smoothly. Follow your documented procedures, document it. Don't just go off your memory because you'll forget steps. Add a little buffer time for unexpected issues. Issues do always come up. As much as you plan, unforeseen issues happen. And be prepared to support the users in the new system. As I mentioned, technically loading the data is one thing, but there will be a learning curve and users will need support. So you want to have them the best experience possible in the new system. And then it should be as easy as, just pressing the go button. In conclusion, we always say with proper planning and testing, migrating data to any PLM system or 3DEXPERIENCE, specifically can go smoothly. Pick your best tools to load the data, follow your procedures, add the buffer time, and prepare to support the new users. As I mentioned, the devil's always in the details. Make sure to fully understand your requirements, your data sets, limitations, technology, and set the right expectations to the users. They are going in a different system. The data most likely will look and perform differently. And finally, we say anything's possible. There really hasn't been a data migration scenario that we couldn't accomplish in a relatively straightforward manner. So, as complex or hard the migration might look, usually we're able to handle it to meet the end user's needs. So with that, I want to say thank you and open it up to any questions, comments, etc. So please, if you have any questions or comments, if I haven't bored you to death, please type them in. One question we have is, how long does a typical data migration take? And I would say that all really depends on the type of data, the amount of data you have. But I'd say typical migration projects are usually 3 to 4 months long in duration. That's calendar time, not necessarily billable time. Usually it's around 80 to 100 hours of billable time, but expect 3 to 4 months between the start and finish. But the actual migration time, as mentioned, is usually done over a week. How much discovery? Here's a question. Bear with me while I bring it up. Okay, how much discovery to put into pre-sales process for data cleaning? How much of hours of data cleaning for a 3DEXPERIENCE migration? So from a discovery or pre-sales, usually between 1 to 2 hour sessions can give us a good amount of information to understand the scope of what we're migrating. So if it's extremely complicated, we may turn that into like a day, paid assessment to go into all the details. But usually through a couple hours, web sessions of sharing, how the legacy work, we can put a big, have a good assessment of what's involved for the data migration. As for data cleanup, it's really dependent on how messy the data is or what they want to do with it. Again, through probably a day to a few days, we can run various reports to identify issues, and then the cleanup, may depend on the output of those reports. but cleanup may be anywhere from, again, a few hours to a week's worth of work. A lot of times the cleanup discovery is more involved than possible cleaning up the data. So once you have a good plan in how you want to automate the cleanup, it's easy to put that in place or program that. But some of the hard time is figuring out how that data should be cleaned up. If you have a missing reference, should it be manually fixed? Should we look in certain directories and other systems for it? Should we create maybe a dummy file to represent that reference? It really depends on the logic. All right. Here's a question. Can we get CATIA v5 data imported as 3DEXPERIENCE? So I answered that yes, at least for XPDM on-premise customers, there's a way, and it's pretty straightforward to load or transform CATIA v5 data to CATIA 3DEXPERIENCE, and from my opinion, it works very well. All right, I don't see any more questions. I'll stay on for another minute here. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in or reach out to me directly regarding any 3DEXPERIENCE migration scenarios you may have, or 3DEXPERIENCE in general. I'd love to hear your questions, inputs, comments around the product. But thank you very much. We'll be doing one more webinar, I believe in August. This is going to be more geared to SolidWorks PDM, but you should see emails or LinkedIn messages around that. And if you have any suggestions for other webinars you are interested in, please reach out or send comments. We'd be happy to take those up and possibly build webinars around it. But once again, thank you. If you have any more questions, please reach out. And as mentioned, I'll stay on for another minute or so.